A sparky girl who was full of life, but you took that life from her. All that lay ahead of her, a career, loves, and family of her own, will now never be.
So what can you tell me about the murder of Tia Sharp, Stuart?
And that was it, and then the door closed and she walks out. I don't take precise times and things like that, but when she walked out that door, I know damn well it was 12:10, according to my clock, because as I was hoovering up the dog's mess by my kitchen, I look up and I've got a great big clock in front of me on the cooker, which says 12:10.
For the residents of New Addington, a sprawling housing estate in the southern reaches of London, the summer of 2012 had been unremarkable. It was a place of close-knit streets and familiar faces, where the lives of families were deeply intertwined. For 12-year-old Tia Sharp, it was simply home to the person she adored most, her grandmother, Christine Bicknell. Tia was a frequent and welcome visitor at 20 The Lindens, the modest terraced house Christine shared with her partner, Stuart Hazel. These visits were a cherished routine, a constant in Tia's young life. Tia was on the cusp of adolescence, a girl described by all who knew her as bubbly, bright, and full of life. She loved her phone, her friends, and the familiar comfort of her family. Her bond with Christine was particularly strong. Tia looked up to her grandmother, and the time they spent together was precious. So, when Tia prepared to stay over on Thursday, August 20th, there was no sense of foreboding, no hint of the darkness that was about to descend. It was just another sleepover at Nan's house. Her mother, Natalie Sharp, had dropped her off. The plan was simple and familiar. A night at Christine's, perhaps a trip out the next day. The house on the Lindens was a typical family home, filled with the everyday clutter of life. Christine had gone out for the evening to work a night shift, leaving Tia in the care of Hazel, a man who had been part of the family for years. To Tia, he was just her Nan's boyfriend, a familiar figure in the household. That night, according to Hazel's later account, was entirely ordinary. He claimed they stayed up late, playing video games and watching television, before Tia eventually went to sleep in her usual spot, the spare bedroom. As the sun rose on Friday, August 3rd, the house was quiet. Christine had not yet returned from her shift. The day stretched ahead, full of the promise of a typical summer Friday. According to the only story the world would hear for a week, Tia woke up, got dressed, and by midday was ready to head out. She had plans, Hazel would say, to meet friends and travel to the Whitgift shopping center in nearby Croydon to buy new flip-flops. He would claim he gave her £10 for her bus fare and watched her walk out the door, a slight figure in her yellow top, disappearing down the path of the Lindens, ready for a day of teenage freedom. It was the last time, he insisted, anyone would ever see her alive. The first hint that something was wrong came not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, creeping dread. Hours after Tia had supposedly left for the shopping center, calls to her mobile phone went straight to voicemail. This was unusual. Tia, like most girls her age, was rarely separated from her phone. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to dip lower, a knot of anxiety tightened in her mother Natalie's stomach. Tia was meant to be home by 6 p.m. When that time came and went with no word, worry turned to outright panic. Frantic calls were made between family members. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. By 9 p.m., the family could wait no longer. They reported Tia missing to the police. The official version of events, the one that would shape the first critical days of the search, came from Stuart Hazel. He calmly told Natalie, and later the police, a simple and plausible story. Tia had left the house at around noon, he said. She was heading to Croydon to buy shoes. He claimed to have walked her to the end of the road, giving her bus money and watching as she headed towards the tram stop. He even mentioned her last words to him, a casual goodbye. It was a neat, tidy narrative that left no immediate room for suspicion. She was just a 12-year-old girl who had missed her curfew. But for Natalie Sharp, the story felt wrong. Her daughter was sensible and responsible. She would have called. The police, however, initially treated it as a standard missing teenager case. They took Hazel's statement at face value. Why wouldn't they? He was her grandmother's long-term partner, a man who was, for all intents and purposes, family. The initial investigation focused on the outside world on the route to the tram stop, the shopping center, and the friends Tia might have met. The family, however, refused to be calm. Driven by a primal fear, they launched their own search. Natalie, her face etched with a desperate terror that would soon become familiar to the entire nation, began pacing the streets of New Addington, calling her daughter's name into the darkness. She and her partner, David Niles, printed homemade missing posters with Tia's smiling face and plastered them on every lamppost, shop window, and bus stop they could find. The local community, seeing the family's raw anguish, began to stir. Friends and neighbors joined the search, their flashlights cutting through the late-night gloom. But as the hours bled into the next day, every street checked and every call unanswered only deepened the mystery. Tia Sharp had, it seemed, simply vanished into thin air. In the glare of the media lights that descended on New Addington, Stuart Hazel stepped into the role of the concerned family member with unnerving ease. While Tia's mother Natalie was visibly distraught, often unable to speak through her tears, Hazel became the family's unlikely spokesperson.
Tell me a little bit about Tia's life. I mean, is she a happy girl? Is she jolly? Has she got any problems?
No, she's got no problems at all. She's a happy-go-lucky golden angel. You know what I mean? She's perfect. There's no arguments, nothing we can think of. Absolutely nothing.
So Tia stays here Thursday night, just with you. Christine's working. Talk me through Friday up until the last time you see her. Tell me exactly what you did.
Tia's come down the stairs around about half 10, 11, something like that maybe. Because I know she was on about going up to Croydon for about, she wanted to get up early. She picked up your mum's DS up, played the DS for a little while. I said, well, we're going to have some breakfast. So I made her some toast, and she had the toast, and then she wanted a sausage roll, because she's always eating sausage rolls. Basically, and then she was sitting there. She doesn't take her washing up out, so I took her washing up out. Just started doing a little bit of washing up in the kitchen. She was in there. She was telling me what she was doing, but I weren't really logging it into my head. I didn't. Do you know what I mean? Remember, like the kids, they talk to you. It goes in one ear, stays there for a second, and it goes out. You know what I mean? As I was hoovering, then she walked out. She walked past me from the front room to go out, and she walked out the front door. That is all I know. And she left her phone on charge, because I told her to sit there and leave her phone on charge. I didn't mean leave it on charge, because what Tia doing, she plays on the BB thing, but then she uses it as it's charging, so there's no charge going through to it. So when I said to her, just leave your phone on charge, it means leave her phone on charge, not use it, let it charge up a bit, then you can actually take it with you or whatever, because she's been responsible to go to Croydon before. She's been responsible to go on trains and buses and trams and everything before on her own.
So when she walked past you and out to the door, did she say anything?
She said, goodbye. Well, I said, well, make sure you're back at 6. She went, yeah. And that was it, and then the door closed and she walks out. I don't take precise times and things like that, but when she walked out that door, I know damn well it was 12:10, according to my clock, because as I was hoovering up the dog's mess by my kitchen, I look up and I've got a great big clock in front of me on the cooker, which says 12:10.
Now listen, you've been living in house arrest,
basically,
almost, for the last 7 days almost now. How's that been?
Oh, it's been horrible. It's been horrible. Do you know what I mean? The family's, we're stuck inside here, do you know what I mean? We've got all the papers outside, all putting accusations down, and they asked me stupid questions yesterday, like, oh, did you do anything? I said, well, no, I didn't. Excuse my language, but no, I didn't. I'd never think of that. I'd loved her to bits. She's like my own daughter, for God's sake. We had that sort of relationship. It was that sort of thing. It was just, you know, she wanted it, she got it. She's got a loving home. She's never gone without anything, so I can't work it out. What the hell's going on? We're all out there. They want to report the truth.
So do you feel under pressure? Do you feel that perhaps the people are looking at you?
Well, if they believe what they read in the papers, they can do whatever they like. Because I know deep down in my heart that Tia walked out of my house. She walked out there, and I know damn well, because she was seen walking down the pathway. I know she made that track down to that way. What happened after that is, I don't know.
He painted a picture of a normal, affectionate relationship, positioning himself as a protective figure. a step, grandfather caught in a living nightmare. This performance was chillingly effective. To the millions watching at home, he appeared to be just another member of a heartbroken family, desperate for answers. He seemed to be one of them, a pillar of support for Tia's distraught grandmother, Christine, who clung to his arm during press conferences. His deception went beyond interviews. Hazel threw himself into the public search efforts with conspicuous enthusiasm. He joined the local volunteers, wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with Tia's face, and tramped through the same woods and parks as everyone else. He gave advice, pointed out areas to search, and spoke with other volunteers about his hopes for her safe return. This active participation was a masterstroke of manipulation. It deflected any possible suspicion and reinforced his image as a man doing everything in his power to find the little girl he claimed to love. He was hiding in plain sight, his grief, a performance so convincing that it fooled an entire community, the police, and a national television audience. Looking back, there were subtle, jarring notes in his behavior. Some observers noted he seemed almost too calm, too composed for a person whose loved one was missing. In one interview, he casually described the police search of the house, remarking, "They've turned my house upside down." There was no anger, no frustration in his tone, just a flat, detached observation. While Natalie's pleas were raw with emotion, Hazel's were articulate and measured, as if rehearsed. But at the time, these were just fleeting impressions, easily dismissed amidst the chaos and hope of the search. He was, after all, the last person to see her. His story was the foundation of the entire investigation, and for 7 agonizing days, almost no one thought to question the storyteller. The quiet anxiety of the first night quickly erupted into a full-scale mobilization. The search for Tia Sharp was no longer confined to her frantic family. It became the single, unifying mission of the entire New Addington community. A ripple of concern became a tidal wave of action. Neighbors who barely knew each other now stood side by side, united by a common purpose. An army of ordinary people, parents, shopkeepers, teenagers fanned out across the estate, their determination a powerful testament to the community's spirit. This grassroots effort was soon matched by a massive police operation. More than 80 officers were assigned to the case, and the area was swarmed with a sea of high-visibility jackets.
The family want Tia home. They miss her dreadfully, and I wanted to assure you of all the work the Met is doing, and we are doing everything we can, everything we possibly can to find her and trying to support the family at this time. Let me give you a sense of the scale of the inquiry at present. I have had Olympic resources redirected to help in the search for Tia, and over the last 3 days or so, that has meant more than 100 extra uniform officers in the Croydon and Mitcham areas. There are over 80 officers working on this case, 40 of them detectives, 40 of them specialist search officers. We've collected more than 800 hours so far of CCTV footage from buses, from trams, and we've viewed more than 120 hours of that CCTV in live time, and that continues round the clock. I would also like to thank everybody in the Croydon and Mitcham communities that has helped with the investigation so far. I spent time with councillors and with members of the Pathfinders charity on the New Addington estate yesterday evening. I was completely moved by their generosity, their energy and commitment. We were stopped many times on the way to and from by people handing out leaflets showing Tia, and to everyone who is doing that, I wanted to say thank you, and please continue to look for her. Can I once again thank every member of the public who has phoned into the incident room. The Met's priority at this time is to find Tia safe and well.
Specialist search teams, accompanied by sniffer dogs, were deployed. The green expanse of Furze Wood, a large patch of woodland bordering the estate, became the focal point of their efforts. For days, officers meticulously combed through the dense undergrowth, searching for any sign, any clue, a dropped item, a scrap of clothing that might lead them to Tia. The whir of a police helicopter overhead became a constant, almost hopeful sound above the houses of the Lindens. Simultaneously, the Find Tia campaign exploded. Her smiling face, frozen in a school photograph, was taped to every surface. It looked out from shop windows, bus shelters, and car dashboards. Yellow ribbons, a symbol of hope for the safe return of a missing person, began to appear, tied to railings and trees throughout the estate. The media coverage was relentless. Tia's story led the national news bulletins every night. Her mother, Natalie's tearful pleas, and her estranged father, Stephen Carter's emotional appeal for his little girl to come home, were broadcast to millions. The nation was captivated and united in hope. Donations poured in to support the search. Strangers traveled to New Addington to join the volunteer lines. For a week, it felt as though the entire country was holding its breath, collectively willing Tia to be found safe. The dominant theory, the one everyone clung to, was that she had been abducted by a stranger. It was a terrifying thought, but one that allowed for the possibility of a rescue, of a happy ending. No one, not the police, not the public, and not her desperate family searching the woods, considered the possibility that the answer to her disappearance lay just feet away from where the entire search was being coordinated. They were all looking in the wrong place. Number 20. The Lindens had become the unlikely heart of the search for Tia Sharp. It was where her grandmother Christine waited, where family gathered to console one another, and where news crews aimed their cameras, hoping for an update. The small, terraced house was the central hub of a community's hope. It was also a crime scene, hiding its terrible secret in plain sight. The police, of course, had been inside. Not once, but 4 separate times in the week following Tia's disappearance. The first visit, on Saturday, August 4th, was little more than a cursory check. Officers walked through the house, but their focus was on corroborating Stuart Hazel's story. They were searching for clues about where Tia might have gone, not where she might be. The house was cluttered and messy, and nothing immediately seemed out of place. Hazel, the calm and cooperative witness, controlled the environment, guiding them through the rooms of the home he had meticulously tidied. A second search was conducted the next day. Again, it was not a full forensic examination. The mindset of the investigation was still fixed on an external abduction. The police were operating under the assumption that the family were victims, not suspects. As the week progressed, however, a strange, persistent odor began to permeate the house. Family members who visited noticed it, describing it as a deeply unsettling smell. They mentioned it to Hazel. He had an answer for that too. He claimed he had cooked a big roast dinner days before and had left a bag of spoiled meat in the loft, promising to clear it out. It was a plausible, if unpleasant, explanation that was readily accepted. Even a third search by a specialist dog team failed to raise the alarm. The prevailing belief was that Tia was alive, and the efforts were concentrated on the world outside the front door. The house on the Lindens was treated as a sterile base of operations, not a place of suspicion. Officers came and went, taking statements and offering support, all while the evidence they so desperately sought lay just a few feet above their heads. The attic, accessible only through a small hatch in the ceiling, was cramped and packed with the accumulated junk of years. It was an afterthought. No one had a reason to perform the difficult task of climbing up and sifting through the debris. For 7 days, the house was a paradox, the place where their missing child was hidden. While hundreds of people searched the nearby woods with desperate hope, the truth of her fate lay hidden in the darkness of the loft. By Thursday, August 9th, the veneer of normalcy inside 20 the Lindens was beginning to crack. For a week, Christine Bicknell had clung to the hope that her granddaughter was alive, and to the man who promised he was doing everything to find her. But hope was being suffocated by a creeping unease. The unpleasant smell in the house was getting worse, becoming overwhelming that Hazel's story about spoiled meat could no longer explain away. It clung to the furniture, the curtains, and the air itself. Christine watched her partner. She saw the man who performed for the cameras, the concerned step-grandfather. But in the quiet moments, away from the public gaze, she saw something else. She saw a calmness that felt unnatural, a detachment that bordered on cold. His story, once so plausible, now felt flimsy. The details he offered seemed too polished, too rehearsed. The lie, held together by sheer audacity, was starting to fray at the edges. A grandmother's intuition, a primal instinct that something was terribly wrong within her own home, began to overpower her loyalty to her partner. The breaking point came. The exact conversation is lost to the privacy of that house. But the outcome was decisive. Overcome with a dreadful suspicion she could no longer ignore, Christine Bicknell picked up the phone and called the police. She told them she didn't believe Hazel's story anymore. She told them about the smell. Her call transformed the house from a base of operations into the primary focus of the investigation. On Friday, August 10th, exactly 1 week after Tia was last seen, police officers returned to the Lindens. This time, their approach was different. The sympathetic support was gone, replaced by a grim, methodical determination. They were no longer searching for clues about where Tia had gone. They were searching the house itself, top to bottom, with the assumption that they had been deceived. The team was led by a detective who, frustrated by the lack of progress and stung by the possibility of a catastrophic police error, was determined to get a definitive answer. They would not leave until every inch of the property had been examined. The search began, methodical and slow, moving through the now familiar rooms. But this time, all eyes were drawn upwards, towards the small, unassuming hatch in the landing ceiling that led to the loft. The atmosphere inside 20 the Lindens had transformed. The chaotic, hopeful energy of the past week had evaporated, replaced by a heavy clinical silence. Family members were escorted from the property, their anxious questions met with grim, non-committal answers. The house was now sealed, a sterile zone under the complete control of the police. Their focus was singular, their purpose unwavering, and it was directed at the ceiling of the first-floor landing. An officer placed a ladder beneath the loft hatch. With each step he climbed, the strong, unpleasant smell intensified, confirming their worst fears. This was not the smell of forgotten food. Pushing open the hatch, the officer was met by a wall of stale, hot air and darkness. He pulled himself up into the cramped, low-ceiling space, his torch beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating a chaotic jumble of old boxes, discarded toys, and forgotten belongings. For a moment, he saw nothing but clutter. Then, his light swept across something that didn't belong. Tucked away in the eaves, partially concealed beneath other items, was a large, bulky object. There was no need for a closer look. The officer knew instantly what he had found. A quiet, terse message was relayed over the police radio. The search for Tia Sharp was over. The words, spoken in the clipped, professional tone of law enforcement, carried a devastating weight that would soon be felt across the country. The search for Tia Sharp was over. Outside, the news spread like a shockwave. The yellow ribbons of hope that adorned the estate suddenly looked like monuments to a terrible, collective delusion. The crowds that had gathered daily to offer support now stood in stunned, horrified silence. Cries of disbelief turned to sobs of anguish. The hope that had united a community and a nation was brutally extinguished in an instant. Tia was not in some stranger's car or a faraway house. She had been in her grandmother's home all along, just feet from where her family wept and prayed. The investigation pivoted with stunning speed. This was no longer a missing person inquiry. It was a homicide. A murder scene was established, and forensic teams in white suits began the grim task of carefully processing the scene in the attic. The house on the Lindens had finally given up its secret. And with that discovery came one immediate, urgent question. Where was Stuart Hazel? The man who had orchestrated the deception, who had stood before them all and lied, had slipped away just before the police arrived for their final, fateful search. He was now the most wanted man in Britain. As forensic specialists began their grim work in the attic of 20 the Lindens, a new, urgent alarm was raised. Stuart Hazel was gone. He had vanished, just as the net was closing in, slipping out of the house and melting into the sprawling suburbs of South London. The man who had performed for the cameras and searched alongside volunteers was now a fugitive and the focus of a frantic, nationwide manhunt. His face, so recently seen on posters pleading for Tia's return, was now broadcast across every news channel, this time with a stark warning. He was wanted for murder. The manhunt, however, was intense but brief. Hazel didn't get far. Later that same day, on the afternoon of Friday, August 10th, he was spotted by members of the public near Mordenhall Park, a leafy oasis in the borough of Merton, miles from the crime scene. A schoolgirl recognized his distinctive, shaven head from the news reports and raised the alarm. Police swarmed the area. They found him walking aimlessly, a man seemingly with nowhere left to run. He was arrested without a struggle, his hands cuffed behind his back. The public performance was over. Stripped of his audience and his lies, he was just a suspect in police custody.
So what can you tell me about the murder of Tia Sharp, Stuart? Stuart?
Well, a couple of minutes with my solicitor, please.
Okay.
Just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that's no problem. It's 1:10. We'll stop the tapes and we'll leave the room and give you a chance to have a chat.
Faced with the irrefutable truth, he abandoned his denials and offered a new, desperate fiction. He confessed, but it was not a confession to murder. It was a self-serving, pathetic story designed to mitigate his guilt. He claimed Tia's death had been a tragic accident. He told detectives she had suffered a fatal fall down the stairs. In his version of events, he had panicked. Fearing he would be blamed because of his criminal record, he made the stupid decision to conceal her remains in the attic instead of calling for help. He claimed he had intended to give her a proper burial later, once things had calmed down. It was a desperate, cowardly lie, a final attempt to control the narrative. They knew the truth would not be found in his words, but in the forensic evidence they were carefully gathering from the place of concealment he had made in the attic. The trial of Stuart Hazel began in May 2013 at the historic Central Criminal Court, better known as the Old Bailey. As he stood in the dock, Hazel initially maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty to murder. His defense rested entirely on the fragile, self-serving story he had concocted in the interrogation room. That Tia's death was a tragic accident, a fall down the stairs, and that all his subsequent actions were the result of pure panic. It was a narrative designed to paint him as a fool, not a monster. But the prosecution was ready to dismantle it, piece by devastating piece. The Crown's case was overwhelming. The prosecution then turned to Hazel's own behavior, playing his television interviews to the jury. They contrasted the image of the concerned step-grandfather, pleading for Tia's return with the chilling reality that he knew she was already dead, her body hidden just feet above where some of those interviews took place. The prosecutor described his deception as an act of breathtaking cynicism. Then came the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. Evidence so conclusive, it sealed his fate. On Hazel's mobile phone, detectives had discovered evidence on his phone that revealed his true motive. This evidence directly contradicted his story of an accident. This single discovery annihilated any claim of panic. It proved his motive was not fear, but a dark and calculated motive. It showed his actions following her death were not driven by a clumsy attempt to hide an accident, but by a calculated effort to conceal the true nature of his crime. On the 5th day of the trial, just as the jury was about to be presented with this damning evidence, Hazel's defense collapsed. Knowing the profound and damning impact the image would have, he instructed his lawyers to change his plea. In a moment of high drama, Stuart Hazel stood before the court and finally uttered the word, guilty. He admitted to murdering Tia Sharp. The judge, Mr. Justice Nicol, delivered a sentence that reflected the profound horror of the crime. He told Hazel that his late confession was nothing more than a recognition of the overwhelming evidence against him. Labeling his lies to the family and the police as wicked, the judge sentenced Stuart Hazel to life in prison, ordering that he must serve a minimum of 38 years before he could even be considered for parole. Justice, in the eyes of the law, had been served. The man who had deceived a nation was locked away, ensuring he would likely never walk free again. The conviction of Stuart Hazel brought a legal end to the case, but it did not quiet the storm of questions that hung over New Addington. Once the trial was over, a wave of public anger and disbelief crashed down, directed not at the killer, but at the police. The community that had worked tirelessly, searching woods and distributing posters, felt a profound sense of betrayal. They had poured their hearts into finding a little girl who was never actually missing in the way they had been led to believe. She was in the house. How could the police have missed her? 4 times? The question echoed in newspaper headlines and television debates across the country. The story of the dismissed smell, the cursory searches, and the unwavering focus on an external abductor became a case study in procedural failure. In the face of this intense outcry, the Metropolitan Police did something rare and necessary. They publicly apologized. Commander Neil Basu, speaking on behalf of the force, offered a frank admission of their error. He apologized unreservedly for the distress and anguish caused to Tia's family by the delay in finding her body. He explained it as a tragic consequence of human error and an initial assumption that the family were purely victims, which blinded officers to the possibility that the home itself was the crime scene. Tia's case became a grim but vital lesson, forcing a painful reevaluation of police search protocols. The tragedy led to significant changes in how missing person cases, particularly those involving children, are handled. The last known location of a missing person is now treated with a much higher degree of forensic suspicion from the outset. The assumption of family innocence is no longer allowed to preclude an immediate and painstakingly thorough search of the primary property, including every cramped and cluttered loft space. But beyond the headlines, the trial, and the official reviews, there is the memory of Tia herself, a memory her family fights to keep separate from the horror of her death. They remember the bubbly, bright-eyed girl who loved to laugh and spend time at her nan's house. They remember the daughter, granddaughter, and friend, not the victim. The yellow ribbons that once fluttered with desperate hope throughout New Addington eventually came down, but their meaning lingered. They were no longer symbols of a frantic search, but a quiet, heartbreaking tribute to the girl in the attic. A reminder of the community that loved her, and the smiling child who had been right there, all along.